Hi guys, I hope everybody's doing well out there, whatever time it is for you. I'm a little bit late getting this out today because it's just been one of those days and it is stinking hot here in the desert. I've been inside most of the day and I'm still too hot, even inside. But today I thought I'd do a video. I joined a collaboration with Frank and Tina, and it's called Old West Wednesday. And it's about anything about the Old West. And so I thought I'd start out with a story about a local legend in the town that I live close to. And you can look it up on the internet if you'd like to read the whole story, verify it. And this is about the great Winnemucca bank robbery of 1900. And history records that on Wednesday, September 19th, 1900, the First National Bank of Winnemucca at the northwest corner of 4th and Bridge Street was held up by 3 unmasked men. The estimated amount taken in the holdup was $32,640. Most of it was in the form of gold coin. Now that would be a whole lot more money nowadays than it was in 1900. And I'm going to show you a picture of the bank as it is now. And I went down there this morning and took a picture so you can see what the bank looks like. Now, it's amazing. It's the same building. Now it's run by a newspaper office, but it's the same building. And they've kept it up. It's just amazing. And you'd be surprised at how many buildings in this little town that was started primarily for farming and cattle ranching, and it was a hub for shipping cattle, you know, on the railroads and that kind of thing, right on the Humboldt River. And pretty fascinating history for this little town. But there's a lot of old buildings that are still here and maintained from the late 1800s, and it's really cool to see them. I did a walking tour of all the old historic buildings in Winnemucca, and this is just a really small little town. But if you would like to see that video, I will put a link in the description, and it's just all the old buildings and what they were used for and who owned them in the 1800s. So there's that. Let me show you a picture of the bank as it stands today, and a picture of the bank as it was in 1900 when the bank robbers decided to steal the money. Okay, during that time period in the 1900s, the town was busy with stockmen, buying and selling cattle and horses, when sharply at noon the schoolhouse bell rang and the doors burst open and the kids came streaming out and down the steps to go home for lunch. Some of the boys like to go down Bridge Street to the river, and they call it chunking rocks, which is basically just throwing them in the river and watching the splash, or some of the more talented ones could skip the rocks across the river. Our poor river right now has no water in it. It's pretty bad. And some of the boys like to go down there, like I said, you know, and throw rocks in the river. And until it was time to go back to class. So instead of going home to eat lunch, they would rather just play around, you know, typical kids. So it was that 9-year-old Lee Case and a couple of pals were on their way back from the river one day when they walked past the empty livery stable. Of course, you all know what that is. That's where you came into town and you boarded your horses there. And saw some cowboys sitting by the open doorway. The cowboys struck up a friendly conversation with the boys. The next day, they saw the men there again, and they stopped to talk to them again. They said they were just drifting cowboys passing through, and they were making small talk with the boys about the town, wondering how many deputies the town had, and how many lawmen were around, and one thing and another, that kind of thing, just striking up a conversation. But I think back in the old West towns, people were kind of leery of somebody asking too many questions, and I don't know why the boys didn't think it was odd that they would be asking about how many deputies, how many lawmen were around. I mean, that right there would be a red flag for me. Then east of Winnemucca, about 10 miles away in Golconda, Nevada, another boy got to know the cowboys. 10-year-old Vic Button, Button, rode into Golconda to school by horseback from the CS Ranch every day, passing their camp in a field down near the river where there was a well for drinking water. There was nothing out of the ordinary about that, and the cattle roundups were about over, and there were plenty of cowboys around that were moving through the country. Vic would have ridden right past the men's camp except for a handsome white horse that caught his eye. Sorry, just a second here. I have to write it all down or I'll forget. Vic rode over and asked the cowboy if he'd like to trade his white horse. The cowboy laughed and said no, he's going to keep him for a while. But Vic had fallen in love with that big white horse. And the next day at his father's ranch, Vic picked out a strong horse, fine saddle horse, and rode it to camp on his way to school in hopes of a trade. But it was no dice. The cowboys were friendly and talked with the kid and wondered out loud what was the best way to get to southern Idaho from here. And then they nodded their heads like they were really interested when Vic pointed out Soldier Pass. Vic rode see there again, pumping the kids for information. Vic rode a different horse past that camp to school every day, hoping that one of them would take the cowboy's eye the way the white horse took his. But the cowboy wouldn't trade. Back in Winnemucca, on September 19th at noon, the schoolboys hurried home for lunch as usual. Carl Smith took his customary route to the corner of 4th Street and then turned to walk along the sidewalk next to the National Bank. As usual, he looked in the window as he went by. But most unusual, he saw a Mr. McBride, Mr. Calhoun, and Mr. Hill standing by their desks behind the customer counter with their hands in the air. Two men were pointing long-barreled pistols at their frightened faces. Over by the big safe, a man with scraggly yellow beard had a hold of Mr. Nixon, who was the bank owner, by the shoulder with one hand, and with the other held a great gleaming knife at his throat. Carl walked directly home, ate his lunch in silence, and went back to school, so completely bewildered by what he had seen that he didn't say a word to anyone until it was all over. Now, back in those days, I find that hard to believe because, I mean, even now, you know how kids are. You see something really weird, like somebody's robbing the bank or somebody's getting in trouble with the police. It's like that's all they can talk about. They run home and they go, "Hey, Mom, guess what I saw?" I know it was like that when I was a kid, and I know kids do it now. So maybe he just was afraid and he didn't want to get in trouble. And sometimes if you snitched on the robbers, back in those days, they'd come back and take vengeance out on you if they got shot or got in trouble. So, you know, who knows? But he kept his tongue and didn't say a single word. Back at the bank, one of the robbers held a gun on part-time owner, or not part-time, but part owner of the bank, and cashier at the time, George S. Nixon. And here's a picture of Mr. Nixon. He told Nixon to open the safe and give them the gold coins. When Nixon refused, the robber produced a long knife and threatened to cut the cashier's throat. The second member of the gang held a carbine, which is a shotgun, on the bystanders. There were 3 other employees and a visitor in the bank at the time, but none of these people were harmed. Nixon complied with demands of the bandit leader and turned over an estimated $32,640 in coins, which the third robber placed in a canvas bag.
Hurry up. Make it fast, this whole town ain't yet.
Okay, so when the gold was secured, the robbers forced the 4 employees and the visitor out the back door into a fenced enclosure so that no one from the front street could see what was happening. Then they escaped over the fence and into the alley where they had horses waiting so they could make their getaway. George Nixon went back into the bank and came out with a revolver, as did the bank stenographer, Mr. Calhoun. Shots were exchanged, but there were no injuries on either side. Bystanders at the reception saloon down the street heard the shooting and fired a few shots at the escaping bandits, but they missed. Meanwhile, a gentleman named Lee Case and another gentleman, Slats Rutherford, were walking past the courthouse when they heard a burst of loud popping and stopped in wonder at the sound. What they heard was George Nixon shooting his 6-gun in the air on the street outside the bank. Johnson, a horse buyer, meanwhile, snatched a rifle off the bank wall, ran out into the yard, went over the fence, and drew down on the robbers as they sped away on horseback. Galloping down 2nd Street, one of them had seen Sheriff Charles McBead standing outside the reception saloon and sent him ducking back inside with a pistol shot. The robbers circled toward the east, and when they crossed the White Creeks Bridge, one of them dropped a sack of gold and lost some time retrieving it. The bandits continued on, making their way toward a little mining town called Golconda, where they had fresh horses waiting. Citizens in Winnemucca quickly organized a posse and even fired up a yard train locomotive to follow along in an attempt to capture the group. The robbers were able to stay ahead of the posse since they had staged fresh horses about every 10 miles to make a speedy departure. Now, these guys had this planned very well. The road they traveled veered away from the railroad tracks, so the locomotive proved useless to the chase. They were followed as far as Clover Valley, where they had another set of fresh horses, then on to Tuscarora, which is up over the top of a mountain from here. Along the way, the citizen posse gave up the chase. These bank robbers had fresh horses stashed every 10 miles, so they could keep up their speed and keep ahead of the posse. The posse just had the horses that they got on in Winnemucca, so the horses tired out pretty quickly, so they couldn't keep up. As it was, they caught up to them changing horses at Clover Valley on the way to Soldier Pass. And the posse couldn't keep up with the fresh horses, but did get close enough that one of the bandits stood up in his stirrups to yell back at them, "Give the white horse to the kid at the CS Ranch." And they did. For years afterward, Vic Button, who was the little boy that wanted the white horse, rode his horse that he named Patsy all around this countryside. And here's a picture. Now, the three men who committed this robbery were never apprehended, and the money was never recovered. In fact, the identity of the robbers was never confirmed beyond a reasonable doubt. Months after the robbery was committed, the Pinkerton group was still conducting their investigation of the robbery for the American Bankers Association. Having made no progress, they sent a copy of the photograph that appeared in Fort Worth, Texas, to Winnemucca banker George Nixon to see if he could identify any of the people in the photo. The photo was of 5 members of the notorious Wild Bunch and included Robert Leary Parker, also known as Butch Cassidy, and Harry Longbaugh, also known as the Sundance Kid. And here's some photos. The Sundance Kid and perhaps 2 other members of the Wild Bunch may have participated in the robbery. George Nixon did identify 3 of them, and there were 3 robbers. Butch Cassidy may have known about it, but he could not have been there since he was planning a train robbery in Tipton, Wyoming. So he was credited for this bank robbery, but he was planning a train robbery in Wyoming, so Sundance Kid and 2 of the other members actually did the robbery. Winnemucca actually celebrated Butch Cassidy days in remembrance of the now infamous men who they believed committed the great bank robbery. George Nixon, the bank president, was later elected as a United States Senator, and he kept a complete file of all of the events surrounding this bank robbery. This documentation was used to confirm that Butch Cassidy could not have been with the gang who robbed the Winnemucca Bank on September 19th, 1900, but the Sundance Kid was identified as one of the robbers. There's still a bronze plaque by the utility pole at the old Winnemucca Bank that proclaims that Butch Cassidy robbed the bank on September 19th, 1900. I guess old legends never die. Anyway, that's a bit of our little local history here in Winnemucca, Nevada. There's a lot to this area where I live in, just locally, that I could talk for hours on it, because there's a lot of things that happen. And in the little towns around us, if you want to hear more about it, I can continue. And next week, I'm going to talk to you about Sarah Winnemucca, who was a local Native American. She lived here with her tribe. Her father was actually the chief of the Paiute people here in the Winnemucca Valley. And she has a very interesting story. And so I think you might enjoy that. I know that there's statues around here and everything for her. And her people were really dealt a bad hand, and she did her best to really help them out. And we'll have that story next Wednesday. So I hope you enjoyed my story for today. It was a little bit exciting around here. They had a big bank robber with not Butch Cassidy as they want to think, but the Sundance Kid was here and helped rob the bank. And it was interesting to me how even back then, you know, there was still honor among thieves, and people still, even if you were a bank robber, you had a little bit of credibility because they didn't kill anyone and no one got hurt, not even the bank robbers. And when the one bank robber stood up on his stirrups and yelled back at the sheriffs, he remembered that little boy that wanted his white horse so bad, you know, and to tell them, give the kid at the CS Ranch the white horse. And for the sheriff to actually do that, knowing that he was respecting the robber's wish to donate the horse to the boy, which the horses are probably all stolen anyway, but I thought it just amazes me how they functioned back then. I mean, there was still even honor among the thieves and the lawmen, and a little bit of respect in there too, which it was a different time, folks. It was a different time. So anyway, that's my story today. Hope you enjoyed it. You have a great day. God bless all of you, and hopefully the temperatures will cool down a little bit for some of us. I have a feeling that it's just going to get hotter here, and even inside I'm kind of a little bit too warm. But we'll talk to you guys all later, and you have a great week. And take care of yourselves and keep gardening.